I pulled into that gravel driveway and sat in my car for almost 4 minutes before I could make myself move. The cottage was exactly the way I had imagined it. The wood was warm and golden in the afternoon light, the lake sat just beyond the back porch, and everything I had spent 3 years quietly building was standing right there in front of me, real and finished and more beautiful than any picture I had saved on my phone during those long planning nights. I should have been crying happy tears. Instead, I was watching my sister walk out of the front door in a bathrobe, waving at the guests already gathered on the lawn, accepting hugs like she was the one who had written every check, made every call, and driven 4 hours every other weekend to make sure this place existed. She had not written one check. She had not made one call. She did not even know the builder's name. But she was standing on the porch of a cottage I had built with my own savings, receiving love I had spent 3 years earning, and not one person in that crowd was asking the right question. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honest. If you had poured everything you had into a gift for the people you loved most, and someone took the credit right in front of your face, would you speak up immediately, or would you hold back and wait to see how far it would go? Stay with Ackles on this one, because the answer she chose changed everything. Ackles was 34 years old when she started the project. That is the first thing you need to understand. She was not a wealthy woman who wrote a large check without thinking. She was not someone who had money left over at the end of every month that she didn't know what to do with. Ackles was a project manager for a mid-sized construction and design firm, which meant she understood buildings very well but did not earn the kind of money that made a $310,000 project feel casual. She earned a good salary. She was disciplined. She had been saving since she was 26 years old, putting money into a separate account she called the family account, which was a name she had given it privately and never mentioned to anyone, not her parents. Not her sister, not her friends, it was hers, and what it was building toward was a surprise. Her parents, Gerald and Nora, were turning 40 years of marriage in the summer. Ackles had been thinking about what that meant for a long time, 40 years. She had watched her parents work their whole lives inside a 3-bedroom house in a suburb outside of Columbus. Her father had spent 31 years driving a delivery route, and her mother had worked part-time bookkeeping from home while raising 2 daughters. They had never taken a real vacation. They had never owned anything beautiful. They had given everything to the family and held almost nothing back for themselves, and Ackles had watched this her entire life and promised herself that one day she would give them something that matched what they had given her. The Lakeside Cottage had been her mother's quiet dream for as long as Ackles could remember. Nora used to cut pictures out of magazines when Ackles was young, pictures of lake houses with wide porches and flower boxes in the windows and wooden boats tied to small docks. She kept them in a folder in her desk drawer, and she never spoke about them as if they were real possibilities. She spoke about them the way you speak about something you've already decided will never happen to you. Ackles had seen that folder when she was 11 years old, and she had never forgotten it. So she made a plan. She started saving harder at 26, 8 years before the anniversary, and by 30 she had a clear enough financial picture to begin researching lake properties within a reasonable distance of her parents' home. She wanted somewhere they could drive to easily, somewhere peaceful, somewhere that did not require a plane or a complicated trip. She found a piece of land on the eastern edge of a small private lake in rural Ohio, about 2 hours from Columbus, through a property listing that had been sitting unloved on the market for 8 months. The land was just under an acre. The price was right. She bought it. She spent 2 years designing the cottage. Because of her work, she had access to architects and builders she trusted. She brought in a small firm she had worked with professionally, a 3-person team led by a builder named Marcus who she had collaborated with on 2 commercial projects. She trusted him completely. She knew his work was careful and his timelines were honest. She told Marcus this was personal, that it was a gift, and that she wanted every detail to reflect the people who would be receiving it. She described her parents to him. She described her mother's magazine folder. She described her father's love of the outdoors and his habit of sitting on the porch every evening no matter the weather. Marcus listened and helped. Ed her design something that felt like it had been made for 2 specific people instead of for a real estate listing. The cottage was modest in size but generous in everything else. 2 bedrooms, one for her parents and one for guests, a wide back porch that faced the water, a kitchen her mother could actually cook in with the kind of counter space and natural light that Nora had never had in 30 years of cooking for her family. A small dock reaching out over the lake, a wood stove for cold evenings, flower boxes on the front windows. Ackles had remembered the magazines. She had built the dream. The total cost, including the land, the build, the landscaping, and the furnishings, came to $310,000. Ackles had saved $220,000 of that herself over 8 years. She took a small personal loan for the remaining $90,000 and structured the payments carefully into her budget. She did not ask for help. She did not mention the loan to her family. She handled it the way she handled most things in her life, quietly, responsibly, and alone. The plan was simple. Her parents' 40th anniversary was in July. She would organize a small gathering at the lake property, tell her parents they were going for a family lunch, and reveal the cottage as their gift. She had already framed the deed in a gift box. She had already had the engraving done on a small wooden sign above the front door that read Gerald and Nora 40 years with the year beneath it. She had planned it down to the hour. Her younger sister Dara was 29. Ackles loved her sister the way you love someone who has always existed inside your most important memories. But she also knew Dara in the way that only an older sibling can know a younger one. She knew the patterns. Dara was quick, charming, and very good at appearing central to things she had arrived at late. She had a talent for entering a room and making it seem like the room had been waiting for her. Growing up, this had meant Dara got credit for group projects she contributed little to, praise for ideas she had heard someone else say first, and a warmth from their parents that Ackles sometimes felt she had to work twice as hard to earn. Ackles did not resent her sister for this. She had long since made peace with the fact that Dara operated differently. She simply knew the pattern existed. When Ackles began planning the anniversary gift, she made a deliberate decision not to tell Dara. Not because she wanted to exclude her, but because she knew what would happen. Dara would get excited. She would want to contribute something small and then be counted as a full partner. She would tell their parents in a moment of enthusiasm before the surprise was ready. She would mean well and create chaos. Ackles had seen the sequence play out too many times to risk it with something this important. So she kept the project to herself and told Dara only what was necessary, which was nothing. What Ackles did not know was that in the months before the anniversary, Dara had started asking their parents questions. She had noticed that Ackles seemed busy and distracted and had made some quiet connection in her mind that something was happening. She asked her mother once if Ackles was planning something, and their mother, not knowing the full truth but sensing something, had said she thought Ackles might be organizing a lunch for the anniversary. Dara had taken this small thread and built something large with it. She had begun telling their parents that she and Ackles were working on something together, that she had been helping coordinate, that she had some ideas she was contributing. It was all vague and it was all untrue, but she had said it casually and warmly, and their parents had absorbed it the way parents absorb things their children tell them, with trust and without verification. By the time July came, both Gerald and Nora believed in a loose and unexamined way that whatever surprise was coming had been arranged by both of their daughters equally. Ackles did not know any of this when she got into her car on that Saturday morning in July and drove 2 hours to the lake. She had coordinated everything in advance. The caterer was already there. The chairs and tables were set up on the lawn. 12 people were invited: her parents, her aunt and uncle, 2 family friends who had known Gerald and Nora for decades, her cousin Bren, and a few neighbors her parents had been close to for years. Marcus, the builder, had mentioned he might stop by briefly since the project had been such a meaningful one for his team. Everything was arranged. Ackles had the framed deed in the back seat. She had the key in her pocket. She had been imagining this moment for almost 3 years. When she turned onto the gravel drive, she saw cars already parked along the side of the road. She saw people on the lawn. She saw the cottage looking exactly as she had always hoped it would. Old, and she saw her sister standing on the front porch in a white cotton bathrobe, her hair loose, holding a coffee mug and laughing with their aunt as if she lived there. Ackles sat in the car. She looked at the scene. She counted to 10 slowly, the way she sometimes did when her emotions moved faster than her thoughts. Then she got out of the car with the gift box in her hands and walked toward the gathering. Her father saw her first. Gerald was a big man, slow-moving and warm, with a way of smiling that made his whole face change. He walked toward her with his arms open and held her the way fathers hold daughters they're proud of, and Ackles pressed her face into his shoulder, and for just a moment everything else disappeared. Then he pulled back and said with genuine happiness in his voice that Dara had told them about the cottage and that he couldn't believe what the 2 of them had done together. Ackles went still inside. She kept her expression steady. She pulled back, smiled at her father, and looked past him toward Dara, who was now walking down the porch steps toward her with a wide, easy smile. Their eyes met, and in that moment Ackles understood everything without needing a single word explained. She made a decision in that same moment. She did not make a scene. She did not pull her sister aside immediately and demand an explanation. She had worked in project management long enough to know that a confrontation in the middle of a carefully planned event rarely produced the outcome you wanted. She knew that the people around her, her parents, her aunt and uncle, the family friends, were not the audience for whatever was about to unfold between her and Dara. So she walked forward, accepted the hugs, said the right things, and held the gift box quietly under her arm. Dara embraced her with a warmth that felt completely genuine, which was the most disorienting part. Dara was not performing guilt. She was not overcompensating with nervousness. She seemed to genuinely believe that what she had done was not wrong, or at least not significantly wrong. She said right into Ackles' ear that she hoped this was okay and that she had thought Ackles wouldn't mind if she helped set the mood. She had driven up the night before to make sure everything looked welcoming. She said it the way someone says they watered your plants while you were away, like she had done a small favor. Ackles pulled back, looked at her sister, and said quietly that they would talk later. The celebration continued. Their mother Nora came and held Ackles' face in both hands and said this was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for them. She said it with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, and Ackles felt the full weight of 3 years collapse into that one moment. This was the moment she had built it for. This was the real thing. She held her mother's hands and let herself feel it, even inside all the complicated noise that was surrounding it. Then the toasts began. Ackles' uncle, a loud and cheerful man named Ray, stood up with a glass of iced tea and gave a long, affectionate toast to Gerald and Nora and to their daughters, plural, for putting together something so remarkable. He said, and this moment lodged itself in Ackles' memory like a splinter, that it was clear where both girls got their big hearts from. The group raised their glasses. Dora stood beside Ackles and raised hers with a soft smile. Ackles raised hers too. She was smiling. Inside, something was measuring. About an hour into the gathering, Ackles went into the cottage alone, walking through the rooms she had designed, running her hand along the kitchen counter she had chosen, standing in front of the wood stove she had researched for 6 weeks before deciding on, looking out through the back window at the dock she had paid to have built over 2 long weekends last October. She stood there quietly and allowed herself to be honest with herself. She was hurt. She was genuinely, deeply hurt. Not by the celebration being imperfect, not by some small misunderstanding. She was hurt because the thing she had sacrificed and planned and dreamed into existence had been absorbed into a story that included someone who had done none of it, and nobody in the yard was challenging that story because nobody outside this cottage knew the truth. She opened the gift box she had been carrying. Inside, behind the glass frame, was the deed to the property. Her name only, because it was her money, her project, her loan, and her decision. The deed was real and it was proof. She looked at it for a moment and then closed the box and went back outside. It was Marcus who changed the direction of the entire afternoon without meaning to. He arrived around 2 o'clock, as he had mentioned he might, in a clean work shirt and carrying a small plant in a ceramic pot that his wife had suggested as a housewarming gift. He was a straightforward man in his late 40s who did not know much about family drama and was simply there to congratulate his client and see the finished product inhabited by actual people for the first time. He came through the gate, looked around at the gathering, and immediately spotted Ackles. He walked directly to her. In front of at least 8 people, including both of her parents, he shook her hand and said clearly and warmly that this project had been one of the most meaningful his team had worked on in years, and that her vision and her commitment to every single detail were the reason the place had turned out the way it did. He said he had told his crew more than once that Ackles was the kind of client who pushed you to do your best work, because she cared so much about getting it right. He thanked her for trusting them with something this personal. The yard went quiet in a way that was not dramatic but was unmistakable. The kind of quiet where people are listening very carefully and trying to make sure they are understanding what they are hearing. Ackles thanked Marcus and introduced him to her parents. She watched the moment land on the people around her, watched her father's expression shift almost imperceptibly, watched her mother look between Ackles and Marcus and then back toward Dara. She watched her aunt lean slightly toward her uncle. She did not draw attention to it. She did not add anything. She simply let the moment exist. Dara recovered quickly. She stepped forward and said hello to Marcus and said she had heard so much about his team and that the work was incredible. Her voice was warm and confident. Marcus, who had never met Dara before and had only ever spoken with Ackles throughout the entire 2-year project, smiled politely and said he was glad Ackles' family was so happy with it. He did not say he had heard about Dara, because he had not, because she had not existed in this story until today. Ackles caught her cousin Bren's eye across the table. Bren, who was 27 and had always been quietly observant, gave Ackles a look that said she had noticed everything. The afternoon passed. People ate. The lake sparkled. Gerald stood at the edge of the dock for a long time just looking at the water, and Ackles stood beside him, and they talked about nothing important and everything important the way fathers and daughters sometimes do when the moment is too big for specific words. She did not bring up the deed yet. She did not bring up Dara. She just stood beside her father and felt the sun on her face and thought about how long she had waited for this. After most of the guests had left, when the caterers were cleaning up and the light on the lake was going golden low, Ackles sat down with her parents at the table on the back porch. Dara was inside, ostensibly helping with the dishes, but Ackles had noticed her moving quietly through the cottage for the past 20 minutes in a way that felt less like helping and more like settling. She pushed that thought aside for now. She placed the gift box on the table. Her mother opened it slowly, carefully, as if she knew something important was inside and did not want to rush it. When she saw the framed deed, she looked at it without fully understanding what she was looking at for a moment. Then she read it. Then she looked up at Ackles. Ackles told her parents the full truth of it: the savings account, the 8 years, the land purchase, the 2-year build, Marcus and his team, every trip up to the lake, every decision made alone in spreadsheets and late nights in contractor meetings. She spoke clearly and warmly and without anger. She said this cottage was hers legally and financially, and that she wanted to give it to them. She said she had had the deed made out in their names as the gift, but that she had brought it here today specifically so they could understand what they were receiving and who had given it to them. Her parents were quiet for a long time. Her mother had tears running down her face. Her father was looking at the deed the way he had looked at the lake earlier, with a kind of careful reverence. Then her mother asked, very gently and with obvious love, if Dora had helped. Ackles said no. Her mother absorbed this. Then she said, because she was a woman who could not leave a question sitting without examining it, that Dara had said she had been involved, that she had mentioned coordinating some things, helping with the planning. Ackles looked at her mother and said, as calmly as she could manage, that Dara had not been involved in any part of the build, the planning, the design, the financing, or the property purchase. She said she was not angry about it in this moment. She said she just wanted her parents to know the truth. Her father looked at the back door, then he looked at Ackles. He said her name once quietly, and the way he said it carried more weight than almost anything he had ever said to her. Dara appeared in the doorway at that moment, whether she had heard the conversation or not, Ackles could not say. But she came out carrying a tray with 4 glasses of lemonade, moving with the ease of someone in her own kitchen in her own home, and set the tray down on the table and sat in the 4th chair like she had always been expected to join this moment. There was a pause. Then Dara looked at the open gift box with the framed deed and said with perfect composure that she was so glad they were all talking about this together, because she had actually wanted to bring something up about the property. She said she had been thinking about the logistics, and she thought it made sense for her to have a key since she was the one who would be closest and most available to look after the place. Ackles said nothing for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said with a voice she kept very even that the deed in that box had only one name on it, and that name was hers. Dara looked at her, then she looked at their parents. Then she said she thought the plan was to put it in the family's name. Ackles said the plan had always been for her to give it to their parents as an anniversary gift. She said there had never been a plan that included Dara's name on any document because Dara had not been part of the project. Dara said, still with composure but with something shifting underneath it, that she had been helping. She said she had driven up the night before. She said she had put effort into today. She said she thought they were doing this together. Ackles asked her sister, very quietly, to name the builder she had hired. Dara said Marcus. Ackles said she had just learned Marcus's name an hour ago from their introduction on the lawn. Dara opened her mouth and then closed it. Their father set the framed deed down on the table very gently and looked at Dara with an expression Ackles had not seen on his face often. It was not anger, it was something heavier. It was disappointment moving slowly toward understanding. Nora put her hand over her mouth. What followed was not a screaming fight. It was something more uncomfortable than that. It was a slow unwinding of a small fiction that Dara had been maintaining for months, the fiction that she had been a part of something she had only heard about in fragments and then quietly claimed credit for before anyone could say otherwise. She did not shout. She did not deny everything outright. She said things like she had meant to help more, that she had wanted to be involved, that she had felt left out and thought that if she acted like she was part of it, she would be welcomed into it. She said it in a voice that was getting smaller. Their mother was crying quietly. Their father was sitting with his hands flat on the table. Ackles let her sister finish. She did not interrupt. She did not argue. When Dara went quiet, Ackles said one thing. She said she loved her sister and she was not trying to hurt her, but that the truth mattered. That 3 years of work deserved to land with the people it was meant for, and that required the truth. Then she picked up the framed deed and placed it in front of her parents and said it was theirs, it had always been meant to be theirs, and she hoped they would love every day they spent here. Her mother stood up and held her for a long time. Her father did the same. When they finally pulled back, there were tears on all three of their faces, and the late sun was doing something beautiful on the lake behind them. Dara was still sitting in the fourth chair. She was looking at the table. Ackles did not say anything else to her that evening. She said goodnight to her parents, made sure the caterers had everything they needed for the cleanup, and drove home. She told herself it was over. She was wrong. The first call came 2 days later. It was their mother. She said it carefully and with obvious love, the way Nora always said difficult things, but she said that she and Gerald had been talking and they thought perhaps Dara should have a key to the cottage. Not ownership, just a key. Because Dara lived closer than Ackles and it would be practical for someone to be able to check on the place. She said it the way someone says a reasonable thing while hoping you will not notice the unreasonable part of it. Ackles asked her mother who held the deed. Her mother said she did. Ackles said that meant it was her decision who had access, at least until she formally transferred the deed to them. Her mother was quiet. Ackles said she would think about it and call back. She thought about it for exactly 24 hours. Then she called a real estate attorney she had worked with before, a woman named Patricia who handled property transfers and residential agreements. She explained the situation. Patricia listened and then said something that crystallized the situation in a new way. She said that if Ackles transferred the deed to her parents as a straightforward gift without any conditions or documentation, then it became her parents' property. Why entirely, and they could do whatever they chose with it, including give Dara unlimited access, invite her to live there, or eventually include her in any estate decisions about it. Patricia said this was not necessarily bad, but it was something Ackles should understand before she signed anything. Ackles thanked her and scheduled a follow-up appointment. The second call came 4 days after that. This one was from Dara. She called at 7 in the evening, which was when Ackles was home and not yet tired enough to ignore her phone. Dara said she was sorry. She said it the way Dara always said things, smoothly and with just enough emotional weight to make you want to believe it. She said she had been wrong to imply she was involved, and she understood why Ackles was hurt. Then she said that she had been thinking and she felt like the cottage as a family gift should really be a family thing. She said that what Ackles had built was incredible, but that it was for the family, not just for their parents, and that it would be wonderful if they could all enjoy it together. Ackles said she understood what Dara was saying. Then she said she would be in touch. She hung up and sat with the conversation for a long time. She understood exactly what was happening. The cottage had become desirable. It was beautiful and real, and it sat on a lake, and it was worth over $300,000, and now that it existed, everyone wanted proximity to it. Dara wanted a key. Her parents, gently steered by Dara's presence and the logic of family convenience, were starting to frame it as a shared family resource. The story was quietly being rewritten so that what Ackles had built alone became something that belonged to everyone in the family, which in practice meant something Dara could use freely. And the irony, the part that sat in Ackles's chest like a weight, was that she had never intended to keep the cottage for herself. She had always planned to give it to her parents. That had been the whole point, but in the space between her intention and its execution, something had shifted. Dara had stepped into that space and set up house, literally. Ackles found out the full extent of this on the following weekend. Her cousin Bren called her on a Sunday morning and said she wanted to tell her something because she thought Ackles deserved to know. Bren said that Dara had been back at the cottage the weekend after the anniversary celebration. She had brought a friend. She had used the spare key that was supposed to be kept in a lockbox for emergency access, a lockbox whose code Ackles had given her parents, and which Dara had apparently gotten from their mother under the pretense of checking on the property. She had spent a weekend there with her friend and had told the friend the whole place belonged to the family. Ackles thanked Bren and said she would handle it. She thought about the pattern she was looking at. Dara had claimed credit publicly. Dara had positioned herself as a manager of the property. Dara had used unauthorized access to the place. Dara had told an outside person it was family property when it was still legally Ackles's property. And their parents, who loved both their daughters and did not fully understand the mechanics of what was happening, were being slow to see that what Dara was doing was not an enthusiasm for the family vacation home. It was a systematic, quiet claim. Ackles went to see Patricia again. She brought her full documentation, the original land purchase agreement, the build contracts with Marcus's firm, every receipt she had, the personal loan paperwork, and the current deed with her name on it. Patricia looked at everything and confirmed that the property was entirely and unambiguously Ackles's. She said that the lockbox access was a separate issue and not a legal matter since Ackles had not formally restricted access, but she advised Ackles clearly that before she transferred the deed to her parents, she should consider whether she wanted any conditions attached to the transfer, or whether she wanted to transfer it at all given the current family situation. Ackles asked Patricia what her options were. Patricia laid them out. She could transfer the deed to her parents unconditionally as she had always planned and trust that her parents would manage access fairly. She could transfer the deed with a written family agreement attached, something that outlined the intended use of the property and who had access rights. She could hold the deed in her own name and allow her parents to use the property freely without formal transfer. Or she could do something more formal, put the property into a trust with her parents as beneficiaries and explicit terms around access and use. Ackles drove home from that meeting and sat in her apartment and thought about her mother's magazine folder. The pictures of lake cottages with flower boxes and wide porches. She thought about her father standing at the edge of tea. He dock looking at the water with that careful reverence. She thought about what she had built and why she had built it and who it was for. She thought about Dara, not with anger but with clarity, seeing her sister the way you finally see a pattern when you have gathered enough information to recognize the shape of it. Dara was not cruel, she was not a villain. She was someone who had spent 29 years learning that proximity and presentation were enough. She had learned that if you showed up and acted like you belonged, people would make room for you. She had learned this from a family system that had always, in quiet ways, made more room for her than for Ackles, and she had never been required to unlearn it because the consequences had never reached her. But consequences have a way of finding their level. Ackles called her parents and asked them to meet her for dinner, just the three of them. She chose a restaurant near their house where they had eaten for decades, a place that felt neutral and familiar and without pressure. She arrived early and ordered coffee and waited. When Gerald and Nora arrived and sat down across from her, Ackles told them she wanted to talk about the cottage and that she wanted to be completely honest and she hoped they could listen before they responded. They both nodded. Her mother reached across the table and held her hand. Ackles told them everything she had told them on the porch, but more slowly this time and with more detail. The 8 years of saving, the loan she was still paying, the specific cost, Marcus and his team and the 2-year build, every trip to the lake during construction. The choice to not tell Dara because she had known from long experience how that would go. She told them about the deed and what it meant legally. She told them about Bren's phone call and what Dara had done at the cottage the weekend after the celebration. She told them about the calls from Dara and from their mother and what those calls had been asking for. She told them she was not angry at them. She said that clearly and she meant it. She said her parents had always been loving and present and she had never doubted their love for her. But she said she needed them to see something that she had been seeing for a long time and had been too careful to name out loud, which was that Dara existed in a space in their family where she could do things that had real consequences, and then appeal to love and the smoothing over instincts of people who did not want conflict, and the consequences would be absorbed by whoever was standing close enough. She said this time she was the one standing close enough. Her father was not a man who cried easily. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. He picked up his fork and put it down again. Then he said with a slowness that meant he was choosing every word that he heard her and that he had been thinking since the Saturday at the cottage and that he was not proud of some things. He said when Marcus had walked up and spoken the way he had, something had clicked for him that he should have clicked sooner. He said he was sorry it had taken him longer than it should have. Nora had tears on her face again. She said she had always known in the part of herself that she sometimes tried not to look at directly, that she and Gerald had sometimes allowed the peace of the family to cost Ackles more than it cost Dara. She said it was not something she had decided to do on purpose. She said she was not sure that mattered. She said she was sorry. The three of them sat there for a while in that particular kind of silence that is not empty but full. Then her father asked what Ackles needed from them. She told him. She said she still wanted to give them the cottage. That had not changed. It had always been for them and she wanted them to have it. But she said she needed a few things to be true before she signed the deed over. She said she needed her parents to speak clearly to Dara about the lockbox and the unauthorized access and the credit taking. She said she needed Dara to understand without softening what she had done. She said she needed the cottage when it transferred to be understood by everyone in the family as her gift to her parents. not a family project, not a collaborative effort, her gift. And she said that if Dara wanted access to it going forward, that was between Dara and their parents, but that it had to start from an honest place. Her parents agreed, all three of them. What Ackles did not know, and what she would find out in the following weeks, was that the conversation her parents had with Dara was harder than any of them had anticipated. Dara was not the kind of person who accepted correction easily. She received it and she reframed it. When their parents sat her down and told her what they knew, she cycled through several responses in a single conversation. She said she had not realized it was so serious. She said she thought she had been helping. She said Ackles had always had a way of making her feel excluded. She said she had felt left out for years and this had been her way of feeling like she was part of something. She said the cottage was for the whole family and she did not see why it had to be such a big deal. Their mother, to her credit, did not let any of these deflections redirect the conversation. Nora had spent a lot of years being gentle with Dara in ways that had cost other people, and she seemed to have decided that this was not a moment for that. She said clearly that what Dara had done was not helping. She said it was not about feeling included. She said Ackles had spent 3 years and over $300,000 building something extraordinary for their family, and Dara had stepped in front of that and allowed people to think she was a part of it. And then she had used unauthorized access to the property and taken a friend there without permission. She said this had hurt Ackles and it had misled their family and it needed to stop. Dara was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said she would call Ackles and apologize. She did call. It was different from the first call. There was less smoothness in it. There were longer pauses. She said she had heard from their parents and she had thought about it more and she could see how it had looked from Ackles' side. She said she was sorry. She did not add anything else to that. She did not ask for the key. She did not mention the cottage being a family resource. She just said she was sorry and she was quiet. Ackles said she heard her. She did not say everything was fine because it was not. She did not say she forgave Dara completely in that moment because forgiveness at that level takes longer than a phone call. But she said she heard her and she appreciated her saying it and they could talk more when both of them were ready. In the weeks that followed, Ackles worked with Patricia to prepare the deed transfer. She thought carefully about the conditions and ultimately decided against anything overly formal or legally complex. She had Patricia draft a simple transfer document with a covering letter that explained the nature of the gift, the full cost, and the intended purpose of the property, which was a private residence for Gerald and Nora. The letter made no restrictions on future access because Ackles believed her parents were capable of managing their own property. But the letter was documentation. It was the truth in writing, attached to the deed at the moment of transfer, which meant that if anyone ever questioned what had happened, there would be a paper record of who had built it and why and for whom. She also had the lockbox code changed. She called her mother, gave her parents the new code, and explained calmly that the old code had been compromised and she wanted the property secure before the transfer. Her mother said she understood. On the day she signed the transfer papers, Ackles drove up to the lake one last time as the legal owner. She went alone. She parked in the gravel driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet. The day was warm and the lake was still, and the flower boxes in the front windows had bloomed since the last time she had been here. She got out of the car and walked to the dock and stood at the end of it and looked out at the water for a long time. She thought about the 11-year-old version of herself who had found her mother's magazine folder. She thought about the 26-year-old version of herself who had opened a separate savings account and told no one. She thought about the 30-year-old version who had called Marcus for the first time and said she had a project she needed his help with. She thought about every weekend she had driven up here during construction, every spreadsheet, every late decision, every moment of doubt about whether she could actually do this, followed by the decision to keep going anyway. She had done all of it, she had done it alone, and it was good. It was real and beautiful and good. She walked back to the car. She had the transfer paperwork in an envelope in the passenger seat. She drove to her parents' house and knocked on the door. Her father answered. Her mother was behind him. She handed them the envelope. Her father opened it carefully and read through the document and the covering letter, and when he looked up his eyes were bright. He said her name the same way he had said it on the porch at the anniversary, with that same quiet weight. She stayed for dinner, just the three of them. Dora was not there that night and nobody remarked on her absence. They ate and they talked and they laughed about small things, and at the end of the evening Ackles' mother walked her to her car and held her face in both hands the way she had at the cottage and said that she was proud of her. Not for the cottage, for all of it, for who she was. Ackles drove home. The family did not snap back into shape over night. Families rarely do. Dara kept a lower profile in the months that followed. She came to Sunday dinners, but she was quieter than usual, and there was a different quality to the space between her and Ackles, something more careful and more honest than what had existed before. They had not fully rebuilt the relationship. That was a longer project than any cottage, but there was something there that had been reset, a honesty that had not existed when everything was smooth. Their parents went to the cottage for the first time as its official owners on a Thursday in August. They drove up together and unpacked a bag and stayed for a week. Nora sent Ackles a photo of her sitting on the back porch with a book and a cup of tea, the lake behind her, flower boxes in the corner of the frame. She did not add any words to the photo. She did not need to. Gerald sent a separate message. It was 3 sentences. He said he had sat on the dock every morning that week. He said it was the most peaceful week of his life. He said he was proud of her. Ackles saved both messages. She kept them in a folder on her phone, not to look at often, just to know they were there. She had a colleague at work who sometimes said that the most expensive thing you can spend is your own energy and attention on people who do not notice the cost. Ackles had thought about that sentence a lot in the months following the anniversary. She thought about how much of her care she had given over the years in directions that had not always noticed it, and how the cottage had been built out of that same deep well of care but had been given to the right people this time, deliberately and with full knowledge of what she was giving. She thought about what it meant to love people who did not see the full shape of what you did for them. She thought about her parents, who had loved her genuinely but had also allowed a comfortable family arrangement to exist that had often required more from Ackles than from Dara. She did not think her parents were bad people. She thought they were people who had needed to be shown something clearly before they could see it, and they had finally seen it, and they had been honest about what they saw. That was not nothing, that was actually something. She thought about Dara. She thought about a younger sister who had spent so long being the one who charmed her way into things that she had stopped noticing the difference between earning and borrowing. She did not know yet whether Dara would really change. Change was hard and it was slow and it required something internal that Ackles could not give her. But she thought the conversation had reached something real. And she thought that if Dara wanted to build something genuine with her, that door was not closed. It was just no longer propped open and unattended. As for Ackles herself, she thought about the 8 years, about the savings account, about the 2-year build, about the choice to do it alone and keep it quiet and carry it carefully to the moment she had planned for. She did not regret the choice. She was glad she had protected it the way she had. She had learned something about herself in the process of it, something about her capacity for patience and for sustained effort towards something that mattered. She had learned that she could build things, real things. Things that lasted. She had also learned something about what happens when you put love into the world and do not protect the truth of where it came from. She had learned that truth left unspoken does not protect itself. That silence, however graceful, can be mistaken for permission. She had been too private about something that deserved to be witnessed, and in that privacy, someone had found a gap and stepped into it. She would not make the same mistake again. She was not bitter about it. She was clear. There is a difference between those two things, and she had spent enough of her life confusing them. Bitter keeps you looking backward. Clear lets you look at where you are now and decide what comes next. What came next for Ackles was work. She had a loan to finish paying. She had a career she cared about. She had a life she had been living on the edges of while the cottage had been the center, and now the center was finished and delivered, and she had herself back. She opened a new savings account. She called it nothing. She let it be empty for a while. She didn't know yet what it was for. She thought that was okay. The Saturday after the deed transfer, Marcus sent a short text. He said he hoped the family was enjoying the property and that it had been a privilege to build it. He said that in 20 years of construction work, he had not often seen someone pour that much care into a project that was entirely for someone else. He said it was a good thing to witness. Ackles thanked him. She sat with the message for a moment. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went for a walk. The evening was warm, the streets in her neighborhood were quiet. She walked for a long time without any particular destination, and she thought about the word witness, about what it meant to be seen clearly by someone who had no reason to make the story different than it was. The contractor had shown up at a party and told the truth without knowing there was a war going on underneath the pleasantness. He had simply said what was real, and that single act of simple truth had done more work in 1 minute than anything else that day. There was a lesson in that. She turned it over as she walked. She thought about all the times in her life she had known the truth of something and stayed quiet because she did not want to be the person who made things uncomfortable. All the times she had let someone else's version of events stand because correcting it felt too small to fight for. All the times she had carried the actual weight of something while someone else carried the credit, and she had told herself it did not matter. It had mattered, it always mattered. Not in a small, bruised way, but in an accumulating way, the way rain accumulates, each drop insignificant and the total impossible to ignore. She thought about what it would take to trust the truth more, to let it be enough, not as a weapon, not as a score to settle, but as a foundation. The way the cottage was built on a foundation before it was built into anything beautiful. She stopped walking. She was at the end of a quiet block near a park, and the trees were big and the light was good, and for a moment everything felt very simple. She thought, I built something real, people tried to take credit for it. The truth came out anyway. My parents know what they have, I know what I gave them, the rest is details. She walked back home. In the following months, the family found a new rhythm. It was not the old rhythm. The old rhythm had required Ackles to absorb certain costs without naming them, and that particular arrangement was over. The new rhythm was slower in some ways and more honest in others. There were conversations that would never have happened before. There was a quality of attention in her parents' eyes when they spoke to her that felt different, more focused, like they were making sure they were seeing her clearly this time. Dara called one evening in October. She said she had been thinking about going back to school. She had an idea for something she wanted to study and she wanted to talk it through with someone. She asked Ackles if she had time. Ackles said she did. They talked for 2 hours. It was the longest real conversation they had had in a long time. Not about the cottage, about Dara's life and where she wanted it to go and what she was afraid of. At one point Dara said, without much drama around it, that she thought she had been so afraid of being behind Ackles her whole life that she had stopped trying to actually do things and had focused on appearing to do things instead. She said it like someone saying a thing they had been carrying for a while and finally put down. Ackles did not say much in response. She listened. She asked a few questions. At the end of the call she said she thought going back to school was a good idea if it was what Dara actually wanted. She said she would be glad to talk through the application process if Dara got to that point. Dara said thank you. The way she said it was different from the way she usually said things, less smooth, more real. Ackles said goodnight and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while before she slept, and she thought about what it meant to rebuild something with a person without pretending the old version had not broken. You had to know that something broke. You had to have let the truth exist. And then, if both people wanted it, you could start from what was actually there instead of from what you wished was there. She thought it was probably the same principle that made a good foundation. You do not build on what you hope is solid. You build on what you have tested and know to be real. The cottage was there, the lake was there. Her parents were in it finally after 40 years of working hard and dreaming quietly. The flower boxes were real, the dock was real. The deed was in her parents' names now, legally and completely. And attached to that deed, quietly filed, was a single covering letter that told the full truth of where it had all come from. Ackles slept well that night. She had not always slept well in the previous months. There had been nights when the hurt had sat in her chest and made everything restless. But that night she slept well because she was on the other side of something and the ground on the other side was firm. She did not need everyone to know what she had done. She did not need credit in the form of applause. She needed the truth to be documented, and she needed the people she loved to understand it, and both of those things were now true. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was actually everything she had ever wanted from the whole project, just arrived in a different shape than she had originally planned. The surprise had been for her parents. The real surprise, the one she had not planned, was what she had found out about herself in the process of fighting quietly for the truth. She was more capable than she had known. She was clearer than she had been. She was not the person who kept peace at her own expense anymore. She was the person who had learned the difference between grace and disappearing, and she had chosen grace, the kind that costs something and stands on something real. She thought about the new savings account, empty, unnamed, waiting. She thought that whatever she built next, she would still build it the same way, carefully, honestly, with her own 2 hands and her own real resources and her name on every document. She would still give generously because generosity was not the problem. The problem had never been generosity. The problem had been silence, and she was done with that particular version of it. The lake was 2 hours away. She planned to visit her parents there in the spring when the weather turned and the dock would be good again. She thought about standing at the end of it with her father, the way they had stood on the porch and talked about nothing important and everything important. She thought about the light on the water. She thought about what her mother had looked like in that photograph, sitting on the back porch with a book and a cup of tea, the lake behind her completely at rest. She had built that. Out of 8 years and a private savings account and $220,000 and a loan and 30 weekends driving to a lake and a builder named Marcus and a folder of magazine pictures she had seen when she was 11 years old. She had built that, and no one could change that, not anymore. The truth had been documented, the deed had been signed, the flower boxes were blooming. And Ackles, for the first time in a very long time, felt like exactly the right person in exactly the right story. Ackles never raised her voice. She never made a scene. She just held on to the truth until the truth had room to stand. I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever built something real, something that cost you years and energy and real sacrifice, and watched someone else stand in front of it and take the warmth from it like it was theirs? Tell me how that felt in the comments and tell me what you did about it. Ackles stayed until the end. I hope you did too.